Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Luffy and Ace Teleported in Avengers World. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The blue light never dimmed. Fury knew this, yet he couldn't help but stare at the curious object in front of him as he inspected it thoroughly. The Tesseract's light blue light should have been calming, almost like a peaceful spring day in the beach, or maybe a calming summer afternoon along the lake in the park. But it wasn't. It was like the calm before a storm, the same blue that you saw before your loved ones were ripped under you and you're thrown out into the world alone. The same blue that mocked you as you walked down the street that used to be your home before everything happened. It intrigued Fury to no end, how something so powerful and mysterious was in such a small box. They might never know the secrets it contained. The scientists had claimed that the Tesseract was stable, not a threat at the moment. Fury almost snorted at the ridiculousness to that one sentence. The Tesseract was never stable. One moment it could be like it was right now, calm and peaceful, but the next moment it'll turn into a deadly wave of pure energy, something that could destroy everything. Fury knew this. He'd always had this knowledge launched somewhere deep inside his brain. He didn't want to admit it, but he was curious for how long this thing would stay calm. How long before it would surely blow up in everyone's faces. It was going to happen someday. Fury had no doubt about that. It was just the question of when and how. How many people will die? How will this affect the world? How will they deal with it? And even though Fury had the most information out of pretty much anything, he couldn't answer these miffing questions. No one could. Not even the Tesseract itself, because god damn it, if it knew anything, if it was alive, Fury would not hold back. Secrets had to be revealed. Whether or not they're good secrets is the question. A hum emitted from the strange, blue cube. Fury looked at it with a sharp eye, not moving but preparing himself for what's to come. Was this going to be when it explodes? Is this going to be when hell breaks loose and no one will survive? Even as a super agent, one above all others, he couldn't defend himself from the unknown, no matter what resources he had. The only reason they had survived the War of New York was because the Chitauri were stupid, nothing without their masters. They were weak alone, but together they packed a massive punch, one that could have possibly taken over the world. But they didn't. Loki had given himself away before that. Loki was not a stupid god. In fact, his plan was rather smart. But he got careless, eager and impatient. That was his downfall. It all came down to how long before he snapped. Oh, and did the bastard snap? With one move, he had told Fury all that he needed to know without saying anything. Loki made a mistake, one that cost him his freedom and his victory. The blue Tesseract hummed again. This time something akin to white lightning flashed across its surface. Fury's eye hardened as he stood up from his chair and walked over to the cube to study it closer. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But what? The scientists had long since gone back to their computers, yelling orders and scurrying about the lab, looking for possible explanations to why the cube had suddenly decided to act up. Why now? What was happening? He could hear them shout. He saw some of the agents in the corners of the room shift uneasily. They backing into the darkest corners, eyes glaring at the object in the center of the room that had suddenly chosen to ignite. They were all watching, waiting. It was a game. All of it was a sick, sick game. Director Fury, one of the scientists, had run to his side, voice concerned. The man's white lab coat was draped over his body and he wore a mask like all the other scientists that occupied the base. His ID card flicked to his side before it stilled, fluttering ungracefully back to its owner. The Tesseract suddenly reacted, but we don't know what it's doing. It would be safe to move away from the object for now. It is no longer stable. Fury's cold eyes landed on the man, his brow creasing before his mask was back on before anyone could notice. He sat up carefully, staring down at the man that only went up to his chin. The Tesseract was never stable, he said simply, voicing one of its earlier thoughts, but he allowed the man to lead him to where the scientists deemed safe for the time being. Fury glanced back, noticing all the agents slowly backing up as well, jumping to new positions, getting ready for an attack. It was like Loki's arrival all over again, but this time they were somewhat prepared. They moved to the shadows, loading bows or possibly arrows. He had no Avengers with him this time. This was just supposed to be a checkup on his main facility. But it wasn't. Now it was a warning. Fury knew somewhere deep down that he would have to gather the Avengers once more. Call it instinct, maybe reason, but it was bound to happen. After all, didn't everyone need some superheroes to clean up super messes? Fury glanced back once more before the Tesseract would be out of sight. The blue object was now humming loudly, lightning flashing inside the glowing blue orb ever so often. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was how the object was turning red, blood red, like arteries, the color seeping into the Tesseract, flashing more and more often. For a second, Fury imagined it like lava, deadly and destructive beyond what was comprehensible. But then his thoughts fluttered to the red, thinking of blood. Like blood on a battlefield. A war. A war was raging on, but it wasn't here. And just like that, the cube was back to its normal blue color, calm once again. No more humming, no more lighting, no more blood. Fury's head disappeared behind a wall. And that was that. He followed the scientist upstairs, approaching his escape route. The black helicopter was already on, its deadly blades spinning. An agent in black walked up to him as he was led to the chopper. It was a woman, someone with sharp eyes and good senses, one of Fury's best agents. Her hair was pulled into a sharp ponytail, something that wasn't uncommon. Her eyes were full of respect for the commanding officer, Director Fury. She said calmly, yet she spoke loudly enough to be heard over the helicopter. The Tesseract has calmed, but we advise you to evacuate. It isn't stable currently. I know, he told her, grabbing a handle and pushing himself onto the chopper. Take care of things here, understood? Understood, sir. She gave him a salute and briskly walked off as Fury shut the door and put on his helicopter headsets. Fury watched her as she disappeared below, possibly going back to check on the scientists that were left in charge of the powerful cube. He continued to stare at the direction of the building even long after it had faded from sight. Only then did he press his ear, activating one of his many communication devices. Agent Hill, do you read me? Yes, sir. The female replied on the other side of the device. Contact the Avengers. Tell them that I'm not quite done with them yet. Of course, sir. And the line went slack, leaving Fury alone with his thoughts. Hell was a thing that everyone experiences in a lifetime. He couldn't say it was a natural occurrence, but with Monkey D. Luffy you never really know. One moment you might be with your nakama, the next going on a wild goose chase to save his brother from this so-called hell. Despite that, the boy could defiantly see why they called this place hell. He understood even more as he stood on the battleground of Marineford, desperately trying to save his life, his friend, his brother, one Marine after the other. They all fell eventually. For some it just took time. Time and energy, both of which the young D couldn't afford to lose. But then the man with the weird mustache yelled something and all the pirates around his cried out in fear. Luffy didn't understand. Luffy didn't hear. But when those blades descended on his brother's head, Luffy knew exactly what was going on. He was not stupid. He was dense and a simpleton, but he was not stupid. He knew what those words meant now. Something that was meaningless just a second ago now felt like words that crushed him. He couldn't move. He couldn't help but stare in horror as the blades descended faster and faster and faster. And he screamed because they were going to take away his brother. The same brother that promised. The same brother that had stupidly promised so many years ago. I will not die. No. Ace couldn't die. It wasn't going to end like this. The blades came closer. Everything seemed to stop because Luffy just wanted them to stop. Make everything disappear and have them go back home, happy and healthy. Stop the nightmare. Stop the torture. Stop the cages. Just stop. Stop. Stop it. And then they fell, all his enemies. The blades stopped too. They fell, just not on his brother. But Luffy couldn't care. His brother was still alive. He still had a change. And the boy took that chance, even when he fell over and over again. He got back up and kept running because damn it he wasted too much time. But the Marines didn't care. Some of them were still standing, staring at him with shock. Why? Why did they look so shocked? He just told them to stop. He didn't want his brother to die. Not like Sabo. Ace wouldn't die like Sabo. That would mean that 2 red cups would be empty, leaving the third one alone to carry on the dreams of his brothers. And even though he hated the idea of being alone, even if Ace did somehow die in this crazy, twisted world of cat and mouse, Luffy would live. He would live and thrive because his brothers wouldn't want him to be sad. That wouldn't stop him from crying, of course. If Ace died, then who would be there to punch him and tell him to shut up? Who would be there to sigh and pull him into a hug when he was sad even though he looked so awkward? Who would be there to carry on the dream of being known? How would he prove that he lived? No, it wasn't over. Ace wouldn't die. And then the Marines attacked once again with new force, making it increasingly difficult to run. He didn't want to fight. He wanted his brother. He wasted his brother free and safe. Currently, he was neither. A voice rang out on the field, but Luffy didn't register it. Help Straw Hat with all your strength. And suddenly the path was clear. The Marines were no longer in the way. New battles raged around Luffy as he continued to run. Ace was right there. There was a path, won by that scissors guy from Impel Down. He cleared the Marines and cut right through the rock, lifting the bridge right up to the platform. Luffy grinned at him for the brief second, telling him something that his voice could not. Thank you. And he was running again, this time with Gigi in his way. Luffy didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Ace was so close. But Gigi, he didn't want to fight Gigi. He didn't want his grandfather to hate him even more because of this. Even though they didn't exactly get along, Gigi was still Luffy's family, his nakama. Even as he activated his second gear, he knew that Gigi wasn't fighting. The Marine was putting on a show, masking his pain. His eyes danced around in the harsh fire that surrounded them, saying something much like what Luffy had done earlier. I'm sorry. Luffy was too, but it eased the guilt that had built in chest as he punched his grandpa right of the bridge. Gigi wanted this too. Gigi wanted Ace to be free once again. I trained you to become a Marine, damn it. But he wasn't. Maybe if you were then this wouldn't have happened. Or maybe it was unavoidable. A trick of fate that you couldn't change even if you went back in time. He was there. He was finally there. His brother looked shocked to see him as Luffy bent down to hug him. Tears threatened to spill, but Luffy wasn't crying anytime soon. Besides, Ace wasn't free yet. He was still stuck in that emotional cage and the physical shackles. It all happened so fast. Too fast. On moment he was fiddling with the key and the next it was out of his reach. Then Mr. 3 came. The Buddha. The explosions. The fire. But it wasn't bad fire. It was his brother damn fire because he was finally free. Then again, was this war really over yet? Or had it just begun? Luffy couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. He could only stare on, watching as his fate approached him in the form of a magma fist. His mind was struggling with all of its might, trying, no, begging, to get his body to move, to dodge, to do something. But it was futile and he knew that. This was his end. Time slowed down. His brother, his stupid, hard-headed brother that he had worked so hard to save jumped right in front of him, shielding him. Baka. Luffy wanted to shout, wanted to scream, but he couldn't. Save yourself. The first approached, this time slower than before. Fire flickered along Ace's shoulders, his muscles tensed bracing himself for the impact that would no doubt take his life. Luffy closed his eyes. Ace closed his eyes. And suddenly everything went black. Though, Tony Stark, genius billionaire, was not someone to underestimate. He was smart, cunning, and had an iron suit that could laterally blow up a building by just pointing at it. The man grinned, his hand scratching his chin. How interesting. Bruce Banner looked up from what he was working on, raising an eyebrow at the man. And what might it be this time? The man walked over to peer at the hologram that Tony had pulled up. Have you been hacking into the SHIELD computers again? Ah, Tony responded with a smug grin. I have, and I found something interesting. Not really wanting to be in Tony's shenanigans, Bruce went back to what he was doing originally. He decided to humor the man, however, and asked a simple question that he would later regret. He pushed up his glasses, spinning on his heel to lean against the table that he was working at. What? Seems like the Tesseract nearly destroyed the building that they were keeping it at, Tony informed the man, flicking the hologram in front of Bruce so he could read the article. Fury was there too. Bruce raised an eyebrow, reading over the information as fast as he could. Was anyone hurt? Tony shrugged. Not that I know of. He maximized his own screen for a better view of the article. Apparently the Tesseract seemed to just go berserk. There are reports that it changed color and sent something out of the building. Bruce read, his eyes widening. He read on, not even bothering to look at Tony anymore. His attention was solely focused on the article. Bruce Banner was not worried easily. After all, he'd seen enough shit in his life and knew how to handle it. But this wasn't something he could handle. Scenarios kept going through his head, some good, some not quite so good. What if it was another invasion? They barely stopped the last one. How would they stop another one? The government would probably send the nuke this time and not fail. Last time they were luck. Next time, the world might end as they know it. He hoped that it was nothing, though he seriously doubted it. The Tesseract was known as a bridge between worlds and so far hasn't reacted to much of anything. To make something like the Tesseract react must be insanely powerful. The Force alone was able to send 3 men sprawling. Bruce continued to read, forcing his inner argument down for the time being. A red light was seen streaking out of the building right as everyone was evacuating. It broke most of the windows and part of a laboratory door. He frowned as he read the next part. It left burn marks wherever it went, much like a fire would. Tony nudged him, much to Bruce's disdain. Do you think Fury'll have us track it down? Bruce shook his head, closing the program. I doubt it. Fury probably already has some agents out looking for where it landed, if it landed at all. Tony snorted, leaving Bruce's side and going back to his screen to see if there were any more details. Awa, come on, lighten up. He laughed. This could be the chance for the Avengers to get back in action. Bruce frowned at him. We practically live in your living room. Tony rolled his eyes. That's not the point. He closed the screen completely, leaning against the table. My point is that we haven't fought together in ages. I mean, when's the last time we've all suited up? He didn't wait for Bruce's reply. I haven't used my Iron Man suit in ages. It's been sitting. Tony was interrupted by the door of the lab slamming open and Natasha walking inside in all of her glory. She flickered her hair over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing. Fury wants to see us. She noticed Tony's expression. All of us, Stark. He called a meeting for the Avengers. Allowing a smirk on her face, she turned around. Seems like we have a little mission to complete. Let's get down to business, Fury stated through the blue hologram, causing heads to turn. Of course, he wasn't able to come in person, being a super spy and all. Some of you might know this already. His eye flickered to Tony for a brief second, disapproval mirrored in his pupils. But something grave has happened recently at the building where the Tesseract was being held. The Avengers looked at each other, knowing that anything involving the Tesseract was bad news. Tony and Bruce, however, knew exactly where this conversation was going. Tony sent Bruce a smug look, knowing that he was right and that Fury was going to send them to find the source. The Tesseract reacted to something. Fury continued on in the same monotone voice. It turned a bloody red and sent a beam of light out of the building. My agents have tracked it down to where it landed. You want us to go check it out, Steve stated, his eyes widening a bit. Yes, Fury said curtly. I am not risking my agents' lives. You all are the strongest group on this planet. If you can't handle whatever this is, then no one can and we will have to take some desperate measures. And what if we find nothing? Natasha leaned forward, her eyes narrowing dangerously. Then you will report to me immediately, the super spy responded. I doubt that you'll find nothing, however. The Tesseract is basically pure energy. I wouldn't react to just anything. And the Tesseract, Thor said, staring at the screen in front of him while absent-mindedly munching on a Pop-Tart. Is it still reacting? According to the scientists in the building, it's stable, Fury said, though I doubt it will last long. There was some beeping on the other side of the screen and suddenly a map appeared in front of all the Avengers. The map zoomed into a small field just outside of New York. This is where we tracked down the blast. He glared at everyone around the table. Find out who it is and what it wants now. With that, the screen went blank. By the time they reached the site of the blast, it was already dark. Tony was hot, sweaty, hungry, and overall uncomfortable. They were all having to use flashlight, minus Thor, who was just trailing along after them, keeping a close eye on all the surroundings. They were all on edge, including Tony. He half expected an alien army to jump out at them and attack. It didn't help that there was a light breeze that night, making the corn that surrounded them rustle and howl. The Iron Man suit that he was wearing should have helped calm his nerves, knowing that he could defend himself, but it didn't. Tony hated surprise attacks almost as much as he hated a flat soda. We're almost there, Natasha informed them, though she didn't say how much longer almost was. Tony had jokingly said that Natasha's definition of almost was a little rusty, and he had said that there was going to be another mile of nothing but cornfields. They could practically feel the energy radiate from the ground as they drew near. Tony could now make out the shape of, was that a crater? In the ground less than 100 feet away. The man wrinkled his nose as it caught a scent that he least expected in an area like this. Burning rubber. Tony could also smell the other scents in the air. None of them were pleasant. Blood was evident even if they could hardly make out the dark red splotches in the ground. The weight on Tony's chest lifted a little bit. At least a creature was hopefully injured, right? Or it might be the blood of its victims. Stay close, Bruce advised, clenching his hand, ready to shift forms if necessary. They didn't want to bring out the Hulk unless it was absolutely necessary. The mission was supposed to be simple. Just investigate and fight, if necessary, whatever the Tesseract sent to Earth. The dirt crunched under Tony's Iron Man boot, making dull footstep sounds. Everything in this dark cornfield was rather ominous. From the wind to the complete and utter silence, nothing was friendly. The ground started to incline as they reached the base of the crater. It wasn't huge, but it was still big enough for a large meteor, almost 20 feet across. Tony had seen bigger craters in the Battle of New York. Steam rose out of the hole, creating a fog so the Avengers couldn't quite see what was down there. Tony leaned forward, only to take back when he heard a groan of pain. Alive, Flint had already notched an arrow, waiting for something to come out of the hole. After all, you could never be too careful. They had all learned that getting cocky isn't the best situation in a fight. Tony took a step forward, ignoring the feeling of wrongness in his stomach. The steam cleared out a little and he could see black outlines, something that looked like a blob. He squinted, eyebrows furrowing. Just what was this thing? He took another few steps forward when the thing didn't even stir. The lines were getting more and more clear and he could see what looked like clothes. If he squinted, he could see how the blob might be a person. No, wait, 2 people. And now he was confused all over again. Feeling a bit more confident, Tony strode forward with Natasha at his side. Suddenly, the steam cleared fully and they could see the 2 people for the first time. They were kids, obviously. One of them looking no older than 17. Both were rather skinny but had good muscles on them. They were covered in dirt, grime, and blood was everywhere. Their injuries looked bad enough to kill a normal person. The youngest, from the looks of it, had it off worse, completely covered in what looked like sword wounds, burns, and other injuries that seemed practically impossible to get. His raven hair was in his eyes, and he was gently breathing, making Tony breathe out a silent sigh of relief. The other was also breathing, but it was much more labored. He was covered in more burns than anything else, especially his hand. It looked like the kid had stuck his hand in a volcano of lava. It wasn't that far from the truth. Kids, Steve said, dumbfounded, looking as Natasha checked their pulse. What the hell are kids doing here? The question we need to answer is, how are they mixed up with the Tesseract? Bruce stated. What good are two half-dead kids? Clint sighed and put his arrow back into its proper place. What will we do with them? Natasha turned to him, eye full of the determination that Tony wished he had. We take them back, of course. She smirked. What harm could they do? I doubt they can even open their eyes. A lot more than anyone thought. Report. The monotone voice of Director Fury echoed throughout the room. The Avengers were all back at Stark's tower, thinking that it'd be better than bringing two potentially dangerous beings about a helicarrier. The last thing that they wanted to happen was risk hundreds of lives if the two boys decided to go berserk and destroy the whole machine. Speaking of the boys that they'd found, both were currently in separate containers in another room. The containers were designed to be able to hold the Hulk when in Rampage and should be able to hold up against two teams. Of course, the Avengers were still wary and had Jarvis keep an eye on them. The radiation of the Tesseract on their bodies was slowly starting to fade away, as Bruce noticed when he'd cleaned up their wounds and bandaged them. It was like the Tesseract was done with both of them, leaving their bodies, and he doubted it'd be back anytime soon. The younger of the two, upon further inspection, had a high amount of poison in his system, yet his body didn't seem to be affected. He also had various scratches, bite marks and burns for various objects. He had a giant X caved into the middle of his chest, which even someone like Bruce had a hard time patching up. The oldest just had a few scratches and some burns. It seemed like the front of his chest was extremely close to a fire, as it was basically just one giant burn. The extent of his wounds was nowhere near the level that the youngest's was, but it was still urgent and life-threatening if not treated. Natasha cleared her throat, looking at Fury's hologram with steel-like eyes that would give even the playboyish men second thoughts about flirting with her. We found children, she said, her voice as cold and emotionless as her eyes. It wasn't like this wasn't normal. After all, she was a trained assassin and rarely showed any interest on anything. Just the occasional shock or small smile, though those were mostly directed at Clint. She'd been better with her emotions the more time she spent with the Avengers, though. It seemed like they could warm even the coldest of hearts. According to Dr. Banner, both had signs of the Tesseract on their bodies, but it has long since faded away. And what are you doing with them? If Fury held any surprise, no one could pick up on it. Are they a threat? Not that we know of, but they've been unconscious since we've found them. For now, they're being held in a safe compound that's designed for brutal attacks. No one had to say that the cages, so to speak, were meant for the Hulk, as they all knew it, just not wanting to admit it. We have them under close surveillance as well and will question them as soon as they wake up. But when did anything go that smoothly? Very well, Fury conceded. We don't want any more trouble after the war in New York. Don't let either of them out of your sight, and if they happen to be hostile, subdue them. If not, keep them calm until one of my agents or I gets there to meet them myself. Without waiting for a response, Fury ended the call. It had been close to 2 days since the day that they'd found the boys. Neither of them woke up, or even stirred in their sleep, leading the Avengers to believe that their wounds might be more serious than they'd originally suspected. In fact, a few of them even wondered if they were going to wake up. Some, like Steve Rogers for instance, didn't know if they'd even want to wake up. He knew war. He knew injuries. This was new to him, but for two kids barely college age, they were meant for wars, meant for death. On a battlefield, some of the worst possible things can be seen and heard. Something like that was certainly not meant for children. His thoughts immediately went to the stories of children being born and bred for fighting. Wherever these kids came from, were they like that too? Born and raised just so they could fight in a war. Steve had never met someone like this, but knew that they probably wouldn't be very friendly. After all, anyone who isn't on their side is the enemy and must be destroyed. The swish of a door alerted Steve of someone else entering the lounge. Steve turned around, giving a small smile and waving at Bruce, who had just gotten back from checking up on their charges. Any change? No, the doctor replied. Their physical injuries are pretty much healed, other than the giant wound in the middle of the youngest boy's chest. That'll take a while to heal, but other than that, they're fine. I'm actually thinking it's their mental injuries that are keeping them from waking. Both boys have been through a lot, it seems. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't wake up for another few days. Just as Steve thought. Steve nodded, smile slowly dropping. I thought so. Wars aren't meant for kids. Bruce chuckled. The results sounded wet and broken, like the doctor knew what was going through Steve's mind. Yes, but did they really have a choice? The doctor grabbed a mug from the countertop, taking a seat beside Steve. Sometimes our world is harsh. I thought we concluded that they weren't from Outworld. We haven't concluded anything yet, as we haven't got the change to get real answers. Bruce stared down at his mug, a ghost of a smile illuminating his face. After all, we're going off guesses and theories. Nothing can be proven until they waken up. Though it might take a while, Steve bit out, placing his head on his hands and staring out the window. Possibly, Bruce said, chuckling. Though the greatest things come with payday. A loud crash sounded, followed by blazing alarms and an unfamiliar voice scream out, Ace, as if everything it knew had suddenly crashed down on it. Steve and Bruce took one look at each other before Steve grinned, reaching for his shield and standing up. Patience? Huh. It seems like patience isn't needed in this situation. Yeah, and with that, both were running towards the sounds of destruction and yelling. When they reached their destination, everything was in chaos. The younger of the two boys that they had found was up and running around, a look of fear and worry on his face. Tony, Thor, and Natasha were trying to round the boy up and keep him calm as well as not destroy the whole place while Clint was standing in the corner, boy ready in case anything got ugly. Debris was everywhere. Wood, dirt, and glass scattered along the floor as Steve ran up to Clint, looking for answers. What happened? He yelled over the sirens. Kid got out of the container. Clint yelled back, not taking his eyes off the boy for a second. Both of them, Steve yelped, his eyes widening. How the hell did they get out of something as strong as that container? The thing was meant for Hulk when he went on a rampage. No, the answer made some worry come out of Steve's shoulders. Just the younger one. Natasha and Tony are trying to round him up and calm him down. Have no clue what Thor's doing though. I'm going to help, Steve declared, aware of the fact that Banner chose to stay near Clint and not the action. It brought Steve a little relief knowing that he probably wouldn't have to deal with the Hulk as well as a rampaging brat. As he got closer, he could pick out some of the words being exchanged between a boy and Natasha. The boy was in hysterics, looking around the room with this wild look in his eyes. He was panting slightly and he looked tired, but he wouldn't let Natasha or Tony get close to him. It was obvious that neither of them wanted to hurt the boy, as he was the only one who could give them true answers. Where's Ace? The boy demanded, his voice sounding firm despite the fact that his posture seemed to be coming undone. Natasha narrowed her eyes, taking a step closer and grabbing the boy's arm, despite the startled look in his eyes. You need to calm down, okay? Just calm. The boy yanked his arm away, backing into the nearest walls. Don't touch me, he practically screamed, holding the arms as if he were hurt. Kid, if you don't calm down, we're going to have to start using force, Tony said, his Iron Man suit on, despite the missing helmet. Steve walked up beside him, giving him a nod in greeting. Tony only gave him a smirk and a light-hearted, capsicle. Try not to hurt him, Steve advised, bringing his shield in front of him and ignoring the growl the boy sent his way. Trying not to, Tony said, smirk vanishing. But he's making it rather hard. Won't let us get close and he won't calm down. If this keeps up, we might be forced to hurt him. Great, Steve sighed, though an idea popped into his head. Tony, Natasha, put your weapons away for a sec. Both frowned at him, though put their weapons away as asked. Steve did the same with his own shield, sliding it away as he couldn't reach it, though could lunge for it if needed. Slowly, he approached the boy, hands up as if he were surrendering. The boy growled, eyes narrowed. His entire body language was tense and his feet were slowly sliding into a fighting stance, though he was still pushed up against the wall as much as he could. Easy, Steve said gently, moving as slowly as he could so he didn't startle the boy. What do you do with Ace? The boy snarled, hands clenching into fists as he lashed out, barely missing Steve as the punch grazed his cheek. The boy went back to glaring at him, but didn't lash out again. Who's Ace? Steve asked with a calm voice, ignoring the fact that the boy had tried to punch him. It was a hell of a strong punch too, enough that he was starting to wonder if these were really just normal kids. The boy seemed to hesitate for a second, eyes looking at the ground before glancing back up at Steve, a look of confusion crossing his rather boyish features. So you're not Marines? Marines? What did this boy have to do with the Marines? Surely, if he was some wanted criminal, SHIELD would know about him and he'd already be gone. No, I suppose we're not Marines. Suppose. The confusion was gone, replaced with another hard look. No, Steve quickly rushed to correct himself. We're not Marines. Why do you ask? None of your business. The boy snarled, the guarded look coming back up on his face. All right, Steve held his hands up, backing up a few steps. Back to my earlier question. Who's Ace? He's my big brother. The boy answered immediately as if he was used to saying this. Then the boy seemed to flinch, grabbing his chest as if it were in pain. In the distance, he heard Bruce mutter something and assumed that he was dealing with the giant injury that was dealt to the boy. His legs gave out on him and he sucked to the floor, leaning his head against the wall, breathing heavily. Steve took a hesitant step forward. You all right? He asked, wanting to help but not wanting to go back to growling and snarling. Fine, the boy panted, though even his voice sounded rather pained. Just fine. This Ace that you mentioned, Steve ventured. Does he happen to be a bit older than you? Longer black hair and freckles with the rather strange orange hat. The boy looked up at him, surprised. His black hair fell in his eyes, though he didn't seem bothered. You know Ace? No, Steve answered, smiling a bit. The boy was much easier to talk to now that he wasn't snarling every other word. But he was with you when we found you. Found us, the boy muttered, narrowing his eyes as if he were thinking. He seemed to give up with a sigh, shaking his head. Never mind. Let me see him. Take me to Ace. Steve knew that it was a bad idea, just in case that both boys decided to attack, but he pushed the thought out of his mind and shook his head. Not until you've told us who you are first. The boy blinked in surprise. Fine, he finally grumbled. I'm Monkey D. Luffy. After they'd corralled the boy, Monkey, wasn't it? What a weird name. Into the living room. Natasha wasted no time in trying to question him. Everything that she'd known from interrogating previous suspects at the boy, who would either completely ignore the question or would answer as vaguely as possible. It was frustrating to all of them, but Steve could somewhat understand the situation that the boy was in. After all, he'd woken up in a random place. Well, it was more of a cage, mind you, and then random people came, telling him that he needed to calm down and answer everything that they needed to know or he wouldn't be able to see that only one that he cared about. Steve probably wouldn't trust anyone if he was in the boy's place, either. But sadly, that was not the currently situation. The kid was dangerous, that much there gathered. He was strong and fast, even if he was injured. He somehow managed to break the cage open without a weapon of any sort and then managed to get a pretty far ways away from said cage without getting caught. Look, kid, Steve eventually spoke up, gaining the boy's attention. You need to cooperate. We said that if you did, you could see your brother, right? Just answer a few questions for us, okay? The boy glared at him warily before shaking his head with a sigh and leaning back against the couch that he was sitting on. Natasha took this as an opportunity to intervene with more questions. Name, I already told you that. The boy mumbled, looking rather dejected and definitely cautious. Name, Natasha repeated, eyes narrowed. Her tone left no room for argument. The boy gave the woman a sideways glance and let out another sigh, resting his hand over the injury on his chest. Luffy, wait, Tony interrupted, holding up his hands. I thought you said your name was Monkey. What? The boy, Luffy, looked confused for a second before something clicked and he shook his head, a small, amused smile on his lips. No, that's my family name. Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy's my actual name. Clint snapped his finger a few times, looking like he was racking his brain for a stray piece of information. Isn't that a Japanese tradition? Japanese. The confused look was back and this time it didn't go away. It was like the kid had never heard of Japan before. Steve watched curiously, thinking that the otherworld theory might not be so ridiculous as everyone thought. You know, Tony said, Japan, the island nation off of the coast of East Asia, full of robots and super smart geeks. I mean, not as smart as me, but still pretty damn smart. The boy frowned at the billionaire and let out a huff. I don't know of a place called Gupin. There are a lot of islands. I don't memorize their names. Nami might know, though. He trailed off at the end and the Avengers could only assume that this Nami was someone that he knew. It's called Japan, Natasha corrected, ignoring the mutter of isn't that what I said, and continuing on with the questions. But it doesn't matter. What's her age? 17. Luffy replied, closing his eyes as if he were going to take a nap, putting the straw hat over his face and leaning back. Steve was about to comment that he looked rather relaxed for being in the position he was, but then noticed all the tense muscles that lined his skin. From the shoulder down, Steve could tell that the boy was anything but relaxed. He couldn't blame the youth, though, after all, this was stressful to all of them. Do you know what the Tesseract is? Natasha said, leaning forward with an unusual amount of seriousness in her voice. Tesseract, the boy repeated, taking his hat off of his eyes and glancing at Natasha with a confused expression. What's a Tesseract? A giant blue cube of pure energy, to put it mildly. Steve answered before Natasha could. Something about this kid was different. Everything he'd said so far didn't seem like a lie, but at the same time, Steve wanted to believe that the kid had heard of something as big as Japan, had known about stuff that normal kids his age knew about. Have you seen any blue flashing lights lately? The boy hesitated, thinking for a second. Not blue, but I saw a white light just before I blacked out. He frowned from under his hat, shaking his head. But that's about it. The next thing I know, I wake up in a glass box. Could you tell us where you were before you woke up here? Natasha took over the interrogation again, leaning back in her chair, waiting for the boy to answer. Luffy took his hat off from his head and started fiddling with the rim. The raven-haired male didn't meet their eyes when he said, rather bluntly, no. I thought you said you were going to cooperate. Steve narrowed his eyes, making sure that the boy knew that he was in no position to argue. Even though he said that he understood the situation the boy was in, it wasn't the time to pity him. What about your brother? Surely you want to see him. Ace can take care of himself, Luffy said flatly, eyes narrowing. But they could all see the worry in his features. I'm not telling. Kid, look. You're currently under our custody right now and it's our job to find out what the hell happened, Clint said, raising from his seat and standing straight in front of the said male. You either tell us, or the government is going to come and take you and your brother away from each other and hound your asses in ways that you won't like. So you are with the Marines," Luffy snarled, his eyes taking on a dangerous edge. Even someone like Steve knew that this was not good and a fight was going to break out if nothing is done. And this time, Steve wasn't sure that he could stop it, so he knew he had to intervene before anything could happen. "We're not Marines," the superhero snapped, taking a step forward and pushing the boy back into the couch. "But, kid, Clint is right. If we don't do what they want, then it'll be bad for the both of us. So, just answer the question, where were you before you woke up here?" The boy looked surprised for a second before he shook his head, crossing his arms over his chest. "I won't tell. Luffy, come on. We really need you to answer this." Bruce tried to coax the kid into answering, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, ignoring the way the boy flinched and curled into him. It was easy to tell that he was stressed and uncomfortable, possibly even more than all of the Avengers combined. Steve distantly wondered how much longer until he snapped, but soon pushed the thought out of his mind. "I won't tell," Luffy repeated, shaking his raven hair and closing his eyes. It seemed like he was trying to convince himself more than the Avengers. "I won't tell." Bruce frowned at the boy, removing his hand. "We don't want it to come to this, but if you won't tell us, then you'll never be able to see your brother again." Steve had to ignore the flinch from the boy when they mentioned his brother. He knew this was cruel, but it was completely necessary. The kid might not look like a threat at the moment, but very well could be. They needed to figure out where they came from and why they were here. If he did happen to just be an unlucky contestant caught up in a situation that didn't have anything to do with him, then they'd let him go. They might watch him for the rest of his life just as a precaution, but he'd be free and would never see any of them again. However, Steve knew that wasn't the case here. We, Ace," Luffy stuttered for a bit, shaking his head. "A war." It seems like he was finally cooperating. "We were in a war." "A war," Steve muttered, looking at the boy. He wanted to say that it didn't surprise him, but couldn't. A war was not meant for kids, especially those who didn't look any older than 60. "Where?" "Marineford." The answer was barely above a whisper. Tony frowned, confused. "Marineford? Where the hell is Marineford?" "I don't know." Luffy looked up at them with a sigh. Emotions were swirling in those dark orbs of his, and Steve had to hold in a wince when he saw just how badly the kid was hurt. "By Impel Down. I thought Nami said it was somewhere near Mariewa." Once again this Nami was mentioned. "I've never heard of those places," Tony announced, completely disregarding the confused look on Luffy's face as if the boy were saying, "How could you not know?" and turned to Bruce, seeking answers. "What about you guys? Ever heard of them?" "No," Steve muttered. "I haven't." The rest shook their heads except for Thor, who simply looked perplexed. "The names sound familiar," he said, but then shook his head. "But I do not remember where." "What about, sir?" The voice of Jarvis cut through the air like a knife, quickly silencing everyone. "The other occupant seems to be stirring. Do you want?" A loud explosion shook the building, and for the second time that day, alarms blared to life, causing everyone, even the boy, to wince at the noise. "Damn it, this is my house. Stop breaking it," Tony shouted to nothing before turning his glare to Luffy. "What's with you damn kids and making things explode?" "Sorry," the boy hesitantly offered, looking rather perplexed with the whole situation. One moment it was a serious interrogation, and the next, it was complete chaos. "It seems your brother has awakened," Steve stated, quickly gaining the attention of the boy. He offered a tired grin, placing a hand on Luffy's shoulder just to make sure the boy wouldn't run. "How about we go meet him?" Ace was confused, angry and worried. He was just in a war, fighting for his life as the people that he'd come to love fell one after another, trying to protect him, and then whatever deity ruled his planet decided that it would be just fantastic for him to have to wake up in a cage. Ace was about to punch something right now, so he did the logical thing and punched the cage, but apparently the cage didn't like that too much. Alarms blared to life and red flashes appeared in his vision. Ace snarled, punching the cage again and shattering the glass all over the metal floor. The fire user jumped out, shaking the metal floor as he landed and dashed for what he assumed was the exit. He tried his best to ignore the pain that ached through his body as he quickly turned left, sending wary glances at the wall as if he expected them to close in on him. He half expected a Marine to pop out of nowhere, but quickly dismissed the ridiculous theory. He could feel the other people in building, but had yet to meet any of them, though he wasn't quite sure he wanted to. For now, Luffy was his first priority and everyone else came after. In the background, he hears someone yell out, followed by other voices. Ace didn't quite understand them since they weren't close, but they were rapidly covering distance, closing in on him in a matter of seconds. Ace let out a frustrated noise, spinning on his heels and running in the opposite direction. He could feel his fire just below his skin, waiting for a command to erupt to life, but he couldn't use that yet. These people still had Luffy. An arrow whizzed past his face, embedding itself into the wall beside him. The fire user snarled, snapping his head around to see a man with a bow aimed directly at him. He wasn't exactly worried since he didn't feel any haki or sea stone from the arrows, but the man seemed to be a veteran fighter, and quite honestly, Ace didn't feel like fighting right now. especially if they were Marines. So instead, he narrowed his eyes, making sure that the stranger knew not to mess with him, and growled out, "Piss off." "Hey, calm down, kid." Another voice broke the tense atmosphere. Ace snorted and mentally rolled his eyes, and he spun to face the other newcomer. The man was dressed in half of what looked like a metal suit. His narrowed eyes meeting Ace's, and the teen recoiled. By now, he doubted they were Marines, because Marines, no matter who they were, would have already attacked and told him off for being the son of the devil. "Back off, bastards," he chose to say instead. "I don't have time to deal with you." "Time for what, exactly?" Yet another voice interrupted Ace's one-sided conversation, and he glanced to his other side, his eyes instantly latching onto the two people walking towards him, a man with glasses and a red-headed woman. Ace didn't feel any malice from the man, but he was definitely wary of the woman. There was just something about her screamed dangerous. "I'm afraid that's none of your business," Ace shot back. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better things to do than talk with a bunch of random asses." "I don't think you have a choice." The man with the bow raised his eyebrows. "This would be easier if you just calmed down." "It probably would have been easier if you didn't kidnap me in the first place." He narrowed his eyes threateningly, raising a fist if one of them happened to follow through on their threat. "You're not helping, Clint." The glasses guy sighed, running a hand through his dark brown hair. "Look, we didn't Kai. Tell me where my little brother is now." Ace's tone was flat and deadly. He was in no mood for chit-chatting with a bunch of weird people. "And maybe I'll forgive you. Maybe if you come with us and you can see him for yourself. He's safe." The redhead motioned behind her, towards the door that Ace had been heading towards before he was interrupted. He narrowed his eyes, trying to judge whether or not it was a trap, but eventually relented. If it happened to be a trap, well, he'd just fight like he'd always been doing. But for right now, Luffy was the only thing that mattered. "Why couldn't I go?" The boy next to Steve and Thor muttered, rolling on the couch and letting out a frustrated sigh. His chest still seemed to bother him, but whenever Steve asked about it, the kid would deny everything. "Because they need to calm your brother down first so he doesn't hurt anyone," Steve answered, sending a glance at Luffy. "We couldn't have you going around and getting him more agitated or something." "But he's my brother." The kid turned and flopped onto his back, shaking his head as if Steve were the stupid one here. "Yeah, we know," Steve chuckled, shaking his head. "That's why we didn't let you go with them. Plus, you're injured." The boy glanced down at his chest, his hand ghosting over the bandages before he clenched his fist, huffing in exasperation. "This is nothing. It's not something you can just brush off like that," Steve said, shaking his head. "Look, kid, I don't know where you came from or how you got here, but an injury like that should have killed you. You're either insanely lucky or made of something harder than metal." The kid chose to ignore him. "I need to get to." He tried to protest again, even getting as far as sitting up and swinging his feet off the couch, only to jump slightly when the door was banged open, letting the other Avengers file into the room, followed by the other teen, looking rather pissed off. Steve could only assume this was the notorious Ace that was brought up several times in their previous interrogation. "Ace," the boy shouted happily, attempting to stand up, only to fall back on the couch with a hiss of pain and several choice words that weren't very friendly. Steve could only watch as the other male, Ace's eyes lit up for a second, but were immediately shadowed with worry when he saw the younger male in pain. Luffy. Before the Avengers even had time to react, the man was on the other side of the room, crouching in front of the boy, worry clearly shown on his features. He checked the boy over for injuries, moving his body parts for him. "Damn it, you idiot." The younger gave the older teen a weak smile, shaking his head and pushing himself up, trying to hide the pain that he was obviously in. "I'm fine, Ace." "Fine." Ace grabbed the younger's hand, lifting it up and ignoring the squirms and yelps of protest. Part of Steve wanted to separate the two, but at the same time he was curious about what they were going to do. The oldest lifted up Luffy's shirt, glancing at the bandages before letting out a huff and placing a gentle hand right on the center of his chest, sending the younger a dull glare and ignoring the whimper of pain. "This is not fine, Lou. You should be more worried about yourself." Luffy looked away, puffing his cheeks out as a sign of frustration. "You're such an idiot." Even though the words didn't seem friendly, Steve could practically feel the fondness in them. Ace loved his little brother, and no matter what happened between them, he knew something like that wouldn't change. This type of trust was not achieved by just saving each other once. This trust wasn't achieved by being close friends. No, this trust is something they grew up just knowing. Even knowing practically nothing about them, he knew that these two have been with each other for years. But that didn't mean that they didn't have a job to do. Steve cleared his throat, loudly, getting a dull glare from Ace and a curious look from Luffy. Both seemed rather unhappy about being interrupted, but Steve knew that it was time to move on from the not-so-sappy reunion. Steve took a seat to the left of the boys, letting Natasha take the seat in front of them. She glared at both boys for a moment before her eyes lessened and she leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest. "Dame." Ace seemed to know what was going on the moment Natasha sat in the chair in front of him. His expression became guarded and he ignored the sigh that emitted from his younger brother, keeping his hard gaze on the woman in front of him. Luffy looked from Ace to Natasha and then decided to settle on Ace's side, curling up right next to him. Ace, Natasha raised an eyebrow. I want your full name, and I don't want you to know my full name. So, for right now, it's Ace. The male responded, slightly defensive. The assassin narrowed her eyes, almost like she was accepting his challenge. This wasn't going to be easy with Ace, no matter how hard Steve looked at the situation. Luffy might have been willing to give out information, even if it was limited, but Ace didn't seem like the type to say much. You're going to tell me your name. I already told you, it's Ace. Natasha narrowed her eyes even more and Steve had a feeling that this conversation was not over. Either way, they could just go search the mail up again now that they had more information than before. All right, Ace. Your brother couldn't tell us where you're from. Care to enlighten us? Ace shrugged carelessly and glanced at his brother that was still attached to his side. His attitude seemed to change fast and Steve wasn't quite sure what to make of it. I dunno. The sea. We don't have a specific home. We move as soon as we can. You live on the ocean? Tony asked, surprised. He jerked his thumb in the direction of Luffy, who had somehow fallen asleep during the whole conversation, leaning peacefully on his older brother's shoulders. Ace looked down and smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. Isn't he a little young to be living out at sea? Luffy's 17. He's perfectly capable of taking care of himself. The male sighed, shaking his head and closing his eyes. You're not Marines, are you? It seemed more of a statement than a question, like the man was trying to prove something to himself. No, we're not Marines, Clint answered before anyone else could. Would you mind telling us why you seem to be worried about the Marines? Let's just say that we don't get along very well. Ace answered flatly. They don't like us. Deciding to change the subject, Natasha took control of the conversation yet again. Your brother mentioned that you were taking part in a war before this. He said something about Marineford, but didn't give details. Care to fill us in? He told you. Ace's eyes darted back to the slumbering form of his brother and he narrowed his eyes slightly. The anger wasn't directed at his brother. No, it seemed like Ace knew that they'd forced the boy into saying something. It wasn't like he had much of a choice. Bruce put in, leaning against a wall. What did you? The snarl was cut off by Natasha's hand waving in the air. The male turned his glare to her, but she took no mind. Tell us about this Marineford. It's an island near Sabaody. I don't know much about it other than the fact that it's filled with a bunch of assholes. He cut himself off and shook his head. Anyways, we were only there for a few hours. I didn't exactly have the time to sightsee with, a war going on. Natasha wasn't quite satisfied with the answer, letting out a frustrated noise in the back of her throat. Steve couldn't blame her, but he did understand where the kid was coming from to some point. Wars were not time to sit around and play. It was active and you had to be on your feet, ready to fight for your life at any moment. What continent is it around? Somewhere around East Asia like Japan. Off the coast of Africa. Your brother mentioned something about Mariewa. Continent. Asia. Ace looked completely baffled. I don't know what you're talking about. It's near the red line, but that's about it. I don't know of any continents. A heavy atmosphere overtook the group, each of them sending glances to one another. The whole situation was confusing, really, but sitting around and twiddling thumbs didn't help at all. Everyone in the room wasn't quite comfortable, but they couldn't quite focus on that right now. After all, they were given a job and are expected to follow it. Hey, Ace. Bruce's voice broke through the silence that the male had unknowingly created. Do you think you could draw us a map of, don't say your world, the place that you live at? Ace seemed taken aback by the question, blinking up at the doctor with curiosity brimming his features. There's no completely map of the world, but I guess I could try. He hummed in thought. I don't have anything to write with or on. Wait, I'll get some, Clint said, quickly exiting the room and fetching the necessary utensils. He then proceeded to dump them on the table in front of Ace, giving the male an expectant glance. Here, thanks, Ace said, picking up the pen and sketching something that was definitely not Earth. When he was done, Ace sat back on the couch, resuming to mess with his little brother's hair. I'm not cartographer, but I guess it's understandable. Natasha picked the paper up as if it were glass, analyzing every detail of the messy map. She furrowed her brow and shook her head, handing the paper over to Bruce. The man stared at the map for a second, narrowing his eyes. This is not a map of Earth. Are you sure this is what your map would look like? Ace looked at the man like he was stupid. Yeah. What else would it look like? A map of Earth was placed in his hands and the male unraveled the paper at a rapid rate, his brother momentarily forgotten. He studied the map much like Natasha and Bruce did, tracing his finger of the continents of America, Asia, and Antarctica. He furrowed his brow and for the first time since they'd met the teen, Honestly, confusion overtook his features. What is this? That, Clint said, tapping the paper, is Earth. Earth? Ace looked absolutely bewildered. What's Earth? At least they knew why these kids were associated with the Tesseract now, Steve thought as he watched the exchange between the others. They might have been normal kids a few days ago, but that was before they were thrown into completely new worlds, far different from their own. Earth is the planet that we live on. Clint pointed to a spot on the map. That is America. He moved his finger to the northeast coast. This is where you are currently, in New York City. What? We're just as confused as you are, kid. Tony smirked. We were hoping you could enlighten us. Are you trying to tell me that I'm on? He swallowed, glancing down at his brother again. Another planet. It's a theory, Tony answered. It's not completely improvable. I mean, Thor's from another world. He patted the giant blonde next to him. His world is really different from ours. Much more advanced. That stew. Ace was cut off by a yawn that had somehow escaped his lips. He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts, but his exhaustion was finally catching up to him. He didn't want to sleep in a strange building with a room full of strangers, but so far they haven't done anything bad, and if their so-called theory were correct, then they wouldn't know that he was a highly wanted criminal. Of course, it could all be a trap, but glancing out the window and seeing giant structures that crazed the sky had him thinking other things. You should probably get some rest. Bruce eventually spoke up. You're still injured and it takes take to heal. You should follow your brother's example and get some sleep. Ace yawned again, his thoughts getting foggy. He wanted to protest, but couldn't form coherent words. Instead, he chose to curl up next to his brother and let his mind drift off into darkness. Should we just leave them here? Steve raised an eyebrow, turning towards his team but making sure to keep a careful eye on the brothers, making sure they weren't about to jump up and try to escape. He wouldn't put it past them, but they did seem genuinely confused about the whole situation. Their words remained true and unwavering save for the few leery glances from both. It was obvious that they didn't quite understand the other world theory. Steve himself would have thought it as impossible if it wasn't for Thor and the whole battle that took place just a few months ago. I don't see why we can't. Tony tossed them all a cocky grin, sounds pleased with himself. I mean, we've got Jarvis watching over them. My AI wouldn't let them escape if they tried anything funny. Besides, Bruce added, they didn't seem to want to leave. I think they just want to go back home. Tony snickered into his fist. They're little lost aliens. While Thor looked rather offended, Steve had to hold in a snort, choosing to just let the words slide past him. It was true in a way, but seeing something so human being called an alien just didn't seem right. On Earth, the term alien was often used as an insult and separated people from one another. They were called strange and weird along with other offensive insults. To put it short, Steve didn't like it. We need to contact Director Fury, Natasha added, her face stoic as ever. And we need to find out how they got out of their containment units. It would be logical to do that first since Director Fury does not like being left in the dark. Yeah. Tony waved her off and started walking in the opposite direction. He stopped and waved them over, looking pensive as to why they weren't following him. Coming? It thought you guys were the ones who wanted to see the tapes in the first place. Yeah, Steve voiced out when no one else did. We're coming. It didn't take long for Tony to switch on the monitors, hitting a few buttons and letting out a few verbal commands to Jarvis before the security footage popped up on one of the larger screens. Tony flicked the monitor with his finger, displeased with whatever he was doing. Steve didn't understand what was wrong, of course, since technology wasn't his strong point. Finally, Tony spun around on his chair, gesturing to the largest monitor that was letting out a strange buzzing sound. I've rewinded the tape, but it's not going to be in HD. Was that what he was mad about? Anyway, I figured we could watch one at a time, starting with the kid. Clint looked at him blankly. They're both kids. The little kid, Tony corrected. The runt-looking one. What was his name again? Fluffy or something. His name was Luffy, friend Stark. Thor offered. Yeah, that. The billionaire spun on his chair again, his back facing them. He leaned back, draping an arm off the side of the chair in a lazy manner. So, here we go. The screen buzzed around a little before coming into focus. It was obviously a corner camera, possibly in the containment until itself. The boy was lying straight in the middle, turned on his side, clearly asleep. His breathing was shallow, and every once in a while his face would contort into that of pain. He was tossing and turning, seeming like his mind was racing while his body stayed down. Ace. The boy twisted his body, both hands clawing at his chest before he shot up, his eyes snapping open and hopping backwards with remarkable speed. A look of panic crossed his features as he noticed the one person that he was looking for was not here. There was a wild look in his eyes as Steve watched him scan the unit. His breathing was much more erratic now, especially when he started running to the glass. He cupped the side of the unit, peering out. What? He whispered, low enough for the Avengers to have to strain their ears just to hear him. It was obvious that the camera wasn't very great at picking up sound. I still don't see how. And before Clint could even finish his sentence, the boy punched right through the glass without any warning. The alarms immediately started blazing, making the boy jump, not expecting the large sound. He seemed to quickly gather himself up, though, and not a second later, fled through the broken window, shards falling down on the ground. He was out of the view of the camera in the next few seconds, obviously not having any clue where he was going. Did he just? Steve couldn't find it in himself to form a complete sentence. The rest of the Avengers looked just as dumbstruck at the display of power. The glass was not brittle, anything but that. It was enough to be able to hold the Hulk if he even went on a rampage, and even withstood a blast from Thor's hammer back when the Chitauri attacked. For a scrawny-looking kid just punching through that like it was nothing. That was unheard of. He's strong, Natasha praised, while Steve mentally berated himself for underestimating someone that much. They'd already said that they were in a war, which meant that they could handle their own just fine. After all, the weak never survived on the fields. Kids got some moves. Tony grinned, and not even Steve could understand what was going on in that thick head of his. Fury's going to have a ball with this. Wanna see how the other one fares? If he holds the same strength as that, then we might have problems, Clint said, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest. Steve turned to him, raising an eyebrow for him to elaborate. Just think about it. These kids come out of nowhere, unconscious and beaten up. He admitted that they came out of a war, so there's no doubt that they're strong. He paused. And smart. So far, they haven't really been aggressive, just confused. And now that we're assuming they're from another world, that means they probably want to go home, right? What if Director Fury doesn't see it like that? What if he sees them as threats and acts on it? Thor hummed, looking concerned. That would be bad. Very, Natasha agreed, nodding her head. He'd probably have them locked up in a secret base so they couldn't hurt anyone, but we don't know about their social standing in their world. They very well could be in a high authority, and, well, let's just say that if others came to this world looking for them, it wouldn't be good. There's not much we can do about it, Bruce added, looking as conflicted as everyone else in the room. If the director decides to remove them, then that's an order. But they're kids, Tony protested. They very well could be dangerous to not only us, but to our entire world. If Director Fury does decide to act, then it will be because he feels there is no other choice. If there is even a small chance that they'll hurt anyone, then he's not going to risk it, Clint said, shaking his head. But like Bruce said, there's nothing we can do about it. Just play the next video, Natasha said firmly. In the end, the decision is not ours. Fine, Tony huffed, but I still don't like it. The billionaire hit a button without even looking at the keyboard, and another tape popped up, this time focusing on the older brother. He was lying on his stomach, shirtless with the bandages completely visible. He didn't look like he was in pain, but they could be very wrong. His hand twitched and his eyebrows furrowed together as he turned on his side, mumbling incoherent words. Wait, Natasha scrunched up her nose in thought. Tony, do you think you could rewind it and enhance the sound? I want to hear what he's saying. Tony tossed her his infamous smartass grin. That's easy. I don't even need to fiddle with the computer to do that. He looked up at his ceiling. Jarvis, rewind a bit and amplify his words. Yes, sir, came the automatic response. The screen buzzed a bit until it was in the exact position they started at. They watched as the male scrunched up his face yet again, mumbling out, Oyaji, Marco, Thatch, Luffy, the rest of you. I'm sorry. He cut off, mumbling something else in a different language. Steve glanced at Natasha, knowing that if the language existed on this planet, she would know it. The assassin dipped her head a little in acknowledgement. It's Japanese. He said, thank you for everything. Oyaji means father, so I'm assuming it's about his family. How does he know Japanese? Tony questioned. I don't think any of us know that, Tony. Bruce spoke up, his gaze on the screen. We can ask him when he wakes up. But it's strange, the fact that he can speak that particular language and his name happens to be of Japanese tradition as well. But they don't seem to even recognize the concept of Japan. Clint was about to add something to the growing pile of comments when the subject of their discussion started to move, pushing himself up in a sitting position and rubbing his eyes, trying to force down a yawn. Damn, I has the weirdest dream, Lou. He seemed to realize that something was wrong and his head immediately snapped up, looking wildly around the cage. Damn it. He jumped to his feet with amazing grace, despite the injuries that littered his body. He glared at the glass in front of him for a moment, spinning in a frustrated circle as he ran his hand through his hair. He muttered something under his breath, no doubt a curse, before reeling back and punching the glass. Steve could tell that the punch didn't come from his desire to be free. It was more of a frustrated reflex. The alarms blazed to life and the young male cursed again, raising his fist with a snarl and punched the exact same spot, this time with much more force. Much like his brother, the glass shattered on impact and the young male hooped out, running from the camera's view. When no one voiced up anything, Natasha sighed and hit the power button by the monitor. She turned towards everyone, crossing his arms. I think it's about time that we gave Director Fury an update. They what? Was the first thing that came out of Fury's mouth when told of what the Avengers had dubbed the incident. The punch through the glass, sir, Natasha said, voice completely even despite the harsh glare that the director sent towards her. Have they attacked you yet? The director questioned, and Steve knew that so far, this was not going well on the boys' side. The director was a serious man. He wasn't about to risk any lives if he had to. The Super Solider knew that if they answered this question wrong, then the boys would be gone. If I may interrupt, sir, Steve butted in before Natasha could give him a blunt answer. They have attacked us, but only because they were confused. After we explained the situation, they calmed down a bit and are currently resting in our lounge. They resisted interrogation, though, Natasha added before Steve could stop her. He shot her a glance that clearly read, "You're not helping." But Steve didn't give time for the director to interrupt. We got most of the answer we needed. We're assuming they're from another world, much like Thor. They don't seem to want to attack us, as I've said, they just want to go home. They won't hurt anyone here. Are you positive? Yes, sir, Steve responded immediately. I am willing to bet my life on it. Those boys will not hurt anyone on this planet. I'll make sure of it and find a way to get them back to their home. He ignored the other looks that he was getting from his friends, knowing deep down in his gut that this was the right choice. He will not regret this decision. Fury looked pensive for a moment, a hand coming up to scratch his beard. He sighed, and then nodded, albeit reluctantly. Very well, I will take your word for it, Rogers, but if they do anything out of line, it's on your head. The director paused, then looked around at the other Avengers. All of your heads. Tony's squawk of protest went unheard. I'm putting all of you in charge of them, so any screw-ups they might make is up to you to fix. Yes, sir, Steve responded for his group. And in truth, he was quite relieved. Thank you, sir. The monitor went black. The first thing Ace wanted to do when he woke up was punch himself for being so stupid. What was he thinking? He'd left himself and Luffy completely vulnerable to absolute strangers. Very confusing strangers. In Ace's view, they might as well be Marines because there was no way he was going to trust them. Otherworld or not, Ace groaned, shifting on the surprisingly comfortable couch, not wanting to open his eyes yet. He was so tired. All he wanted to do was curl back in a ball and sleep. His mind was spinning and every single part of his body hurt, due to aftermath from the war. Ace bit his lip as the past day came back to him. Wasn't there anything that he could do right? Not only did Luffy get injured because of him, his only father and family had died just to try and protect him. And for what? Just so he could get sent worlds away stuck with a bunch of asses. The young male lets out a heavy breath, silently promising himself that he wouldn't jack up everything again. He had to protect Luffy. Right now, away from his family, Luffy was his first and only priority. His life was insignificant compared to Luffy's, so it wouldn't matter if he died or not, just as long as Luffy was okay. But then he remembered that haunted look in his little brother's eyes as he watched helplessly back in that horrible war. It was the same look so many years ago when both brothers had realized they'd lost Sabo, the only other one who could really relate to them. Ace never, ever wanted to see that look on Luffy's face again. Unconsciously, his hand had wandered, patting the spot next to him, searching for the little rubber brat. When he felt nothing, Ace's eyes snapped open and his head shot up. He looked around wildly, but his little brother wasn't in the room. Biting down the panic that was struggling to break free, Ace tenderly pushed himself off the couch and was about to look around when a voice that came from seemingly nowhere interrupted him. In case you are looking for an exit from this building, I must let you know that I have been programmed to keep you inside, Mr. Ace. Ace almost burst into fire right then and there, but controlled it at the last moment. He looked at the ceiling and around the room, but there still wasn't a single soul there. Finding his voice, Ace narrowed his eyes in a glare. He had to admit that he felt rather stupid glaring at nothing. Who are you? I am Jarvis. The voice responded in the same monotone voice. I am Mr. Stark's AI system. Although Ace didn't have any idea what the hell an AI was. But at the moment he hardly cared. Luffy needed to be found first. Do not attempt to escape. I wasn't going to. Ace grumbled mostly to himself, but obviously Jarvis heard it too, because it quit pestering him. He mentally added a yet to the end of his sentence because there was no way that he'd be staying here for long. He just needed to find Luffy, drag his rubber butt out of here, and they'd be good. They'd find a way to get back home of their own. They didn't need anyone's help. Ace scoured the whole living room before he decided that, no, Luffy wasn't in this room. He bit back a frustrated groan because leave it to his brother to make everything complicated when all they wanted to do was leave. Shaking his head, the male glances at the ceiling. Maybe Jarvis knew where the hell his little brother was. Hey, Jarvis, Ace called out and tried not to think that he's literally talking to a ceiling. Yes, Mr. Ace. The voice immediately responded. Ace starched the back of his neck and glanced in the direction of the door. He didn't really trust this mysterious AI, but it wasn't like he had any other brilliant ideas. Do you know where Luffy is? Currently in the kitchen, sir. The voice replied, and Ace feels like smacking his already throbbing head on the head of a ship. Of course Luffy was in the kitchen. Where else would he be? He seems to have a very large appetite. Ace snorted and rolled his eyes. He doesn't respond to the AI and starts to go off in a random direction before he realizes that he doesn't know where the hell he was going. Holding back a sigh, he looks up at the ceiling again. Oi, where's the kitchen, exactly? The door to your left. The AI replies and Ace was off. Now that he thought about it, he could smell the aroma of food that was coming from there, and if he listened carefully, he could almost hear the thuds and crashes that were coming from that direction. He started to jog, ignoring the pain that erupted all over his body. The young male reached the door in a matter of seconds before he tried to push it open, only to find that it opens on its own and that he was sent stumbling into the kitchen. He ends up falling on his back, pain exploding from where he hit the ground. He froze, waiting until the pain subsided and he could think straight. The noise that was there before had stopped. There's a sound of scraping, and suddenly a bright grin hovered inches above Ace's face. Ace, his little brother, crawled onto his stomach and sat there. He didn't move as fast or as graceful as normal, so Ace can only assume that Luffy's as sore as Ace's. Ace brought a hand up and ruffled Luffy's hair, causing the boy to laugh. Luffy then managed to squirm off of his chest and bounded over to the very large refrigerator and resumed stuffing his face with all the food that these people had. Should have figured that I'd find you here, Ace said, shaking his head to the side. He'd always been jealous of Luffy's quick ability to recover from harmful situations. Want some, Ace? The fire user looked up to find Luffy, a pizza slice stuck in his mouth and his hand outstretched with an uneaten slice sitting on top of it. A pizza box was sitting at his feet with Domino's scrawled in big, red letters on the top. Ace had never heard of the place before, but then again, everything around here was strange, so he didn't give it much thought. Instead, he rolled his eyes and took the pizza slice from his brother. Luffy laughed before stuffing another slice down his throat, making happy noises like a toddler who hadn't gotten fed for a while. Ace takes a bite of his pizza, but he wasn't exactly hungry after all the stress he'd been through. Still, he eyed the pizza, deciding whether or not he should finish it since he felt nauseous. Soon, the fire user relented, thinking that he might not get another meal for a while. He downed the whole slice in one bite and reached for another one, chowing down as that as well. Ace didn't know how long they sat there on the spotless kitchen floor in a stranger's home, eating their food. He watched as his little brother had discovered something called a Pop-Tart and quickly fell in love. Ace had refused to eat them since he doubted that his stomach could hold the sugary substance. A stray thought came to his mind. Hey Luffy, The boy didn't even look up from the Pop-Tart box. Ace bit his lip, thinking on how he should word what he was about to say. Eventually, he sighs and shakes his head. Don't use your, he cut himself off, about to say devil fruit. No stretching, he says evenly, his voice low just in case there were unwanted ears around. Luffy would know what he meant. These people, they think we're from a different, world. He forced the word out, still having a hard time believing it. Plus, we don't know if they're enemies or not, so don't use your devil fruit unless absolutely necessary. Okay, Luffy chirped as if it wouldn't be a problem. Ace bit back a groan, only hoping that his brother would keep it a secret. He didn't plan on being there for much longer, so he hoped his brother could hold out until they figured out how to escape. I'm serious, Luffy, he said. I know, Luffy responded, looking up from his food and offering him a cheeky grin. We'll be fine. Plus, they have food. As if to prove his stupid point, the boy took another Pop-Tart, chocolate this time, and stuffed it in his mouth with a grin. He had long since eaten all the meat from their stock, quickly moving on to the next best thing, which happened to be Pop-Tarts. Ace just snorted and didn't say anything. It wasn't long after that they heard the opening of those automatic doors. There was yelling shortly after from the living room, and Ace forced himself not to roll his eyes. They strangers probably figured out that he and his brother were no longer there. Ace could make out Jarvis's voice, but other than that, they all sounded the same. Soon enough, he heard footsteps coming in their direction. Ace tensed up and glanced at Luffy, but the rubber idiot was too engrossed in his food to do much. The door slid open and Ace glared at the intruders. All of 6 of the weirdos from before were standing there, looking at them like he'd burned their houses down. Ace raised an eyebrow but refused to open his mouth until one of them spoke first. Fortunately, the man with the goatee decided to take up his little challenge. What the hell are you thinking? Why'd you move? Ace rebelliously grabbed the nearest food to his hand, which happened to be a Pop-Tart, and held it up slowly before taking a bite from it. He ignored the way his stomach protested because, damn, he was not going to listen to these bastards. We were hungry. The blonde with the ponytail looked rather offended, like they'd just eaten his treasure, but Ace would be lying if he said he'd cared. If it was their food, then they shouldn't have just left it out for everyone to eat. The others didn't seem to care as much. You should have asked. The man from before insisted, and Ace just snorted. You should have let us go already. So I guess we're even, the fire user said without a trace of emotion in his voice. Luffy looked up from where he was pigging out, Pop-Tart still in one hand, and watched the conversation with his large eyes. The goatee man tried to protest, but Ace just rolled his eyes and waved him off. You still shouldn't have explored on your own. The reed-headed girl, the one that interrogated them, stepped forward, hand slowly reaching down to her hip as if she were reaching for a weapon. Ace narrowed his eyes even more, his hand clenching into a fist. Why do you even care? Ace tried to hide the snarl in his voice. From the corner of his eye, he saw Luffy nodding his head in agreement. Because we're going to watch after you until we can find a way to get you back home. Another man, this one rather shaggy with a white lab coat on, responds. Another blonde-haired male with the red, white, and blue shirt on next to him nodded in agreement. Ace was practically seething, and if it weren't for his self-control, fires would probably be popping up all over his body. Watch over them. Did this man think they were little children that could handle themselves? Did they think that they were helpless, that they couldn't defend each other? We can take care of ourselves, he said, his voice slow and dangerous because, damn it, he was not going to let his guard down around these people twice. It was bad enough when he'd fallen asleep, completely vulnerable to attacks. If he did that again, he wasn't so sure he'd come out unscathed. Sorry, kiddo, but no can do, the goatee man said. You see, we don't exactly have a choice in it either. You're stuck with us until we can find a way to get you back. Ace glared at them. You don't control me. Yeah, goatee man replied, rolling his eyes. But our boss does, and he says you're not going anywhere. Ace's eyes narrow even further. Look, kid, don't take it personally. You and your brother were sent here by a very dangerous weapon that was supposed to be dormant. We're just trying to prevent another war from breaking out. It is not a matter that should be taken lightly. The weapon has caused many a painful end, and we do not wish that fate upon any more. The big blonde guy with the ponytail added. What the hell are you even talking about? Ace snapped because all he was hearing was complete gibberish from a bunch of people that seemed to be assuming that he was in control of this supposedly oh-so-powerful weapon of doom. The red-haired woman was about to speak, but the red, white, and blue blonde guy cut her off, coming forward and offering a hand to Ace to help him off the floor. Hesitantly, Ace took it and the male pulled him to his feet, patting his back. Ace tried not to flinch when the man hit a sore spot. We should take this back to the living room. I don't think we've even introduced ourselves yet, have we? At Ace's headshake, the man nodded. Then we'll do that and explain what we know to you. In turn, you have to explain what you know to us. Agreed. His tone left no room for argument. Ace glanced at the others of the group, trying to decide on whether or not he should trust them. These people seemed to know what they were talking about. They'd mentioned a powerful weapon that quite possibly sent them here. They also mentioned a war, but that wasn't as interested in that. Ace had enough wars for a lifetime. Maybe if they found the weapon again, it would send them home. Finally, Ace nodded. All right. His voice sounded a bit dry. He glanced back at his little brother who was still on the ground surrounded by his food hoard. Come on, Luffy. We'll get more food later. Luffy pouted, looking up at him with those big doe eyes. But I'm still hungry. Yeah, I know, Ace said dryly. But we've got stuff to do. We can eat later. Luffy huffed like that's the stupidest thing he's heard, but jumped to his feet anyway. He swayed a bit, then shook his head and bounded right up behind Ace. The strangers kept glancing at the pile of discarded wrappers and some uneaten food on the ground. Then back at Luffy, but both brothers ignored it. They'd been given looks like that their whole lives. So, the red, white, and blue man continued, tearing his eyes away from the pile of trash. Why don't we go find out the truth? Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.